So things just keep getting worse for Putin's war machine, and as his primary forms of revenue, his oil networks and his economic stability get worse. For years, Russia's shadow fleet, a web of aging, uninsured tankers that's keeping his machine, his regime afloat, literally, well, they're sinking. And that system is cracking even more with Ukraine's multitude of different attacks and ways to undermine Putin's war. In the last week alone, as we've covered on the channel, new US sanctions are sending shockwaves across Moscow's oil network, its energy giants Rosneft and Lukoil, suddenly radioactive to so many global financial institutions, not just Western, but Chinese, Indian, and those secondary sanctions really being a big threat to off-put the remaining countries that support Putin. Simultaneously, Ukrainian drones continue striking refineries inside Russia, most recently the Topuz oil port on the Black Sea, halting exports, sparking fires, and showing that the battlefield is even more in Russia than you could say in parts of Ukraine. Russia, Moscow, going and experiencing its first blackouts ever. And while you might think that these are another sanctions story, another oil price headline, it is different because it shows you the importance of continuing that economic pressure, that in some ways the economic coercion, the economic warfare is just as important, if not more, than the military one for the longer term. All that in mind, in this video I wanted to break down Trump's newest secondary sanctions more thoroughly, what it means for the oil network, Putin's shadow fleet, and how this plays into Ukraine's internal strikes of Russia, and what it all means for the balance of power for the rest of this year. This is the Global Gambit. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to this video again on the Russia-Ukraine war. A bit of an update on developments that we've been covering in the past couple of weeks. And when the first, obviously, Western sanctions were put in on Russian oil after the 2022 full-scale invasion, the Kremlin quickly turned to the shadows. Hundreds of these oil tankers, bought through shell companies and flagged under fake registries, began carrying Russian crude outside Western insurance systems. This shadow fleet quickly became Moscow's primary economic lifeline. And by manipulating tracking data and spoofing GPS signals, these ships pretend to be in one place, while obviously secretly transferring oil to non-blacklisted vessels in another. Now, if that sounds like something out of the Cold War spy novels you seem to all love, well, you're not wrong, except it's happening in everyday waters from off the coast of Cyprus. I saw it myself firsthand during the summer, Oman, and the South China Sea. Now, I want to hear what you guys have to say about this, so do drop your comments below and watch further, as I want to play out how this could be important for Putin's stability in the short to medium term. Now, according to some data from various sources, GPS jamming incidents involving Russian vessels have jumped 510% this year alone. Over 11,000 spoofed ships, as it's called, between July and September. That's 3 months. And the number of falsely flagged tankers has now surpassed 1,000, an all-time record. So if you're trying to imagine what that looks like, picture a rusted tanker quietly meeting another in the sort of dark, hoses snaking across decks, oil flowing unseen, all to keep Russia's economy breathing. And here's the catch. Those ships only work as long as the financial plumbing behind them remains afloat. Lots of watery puns in this video. The bankers, insurers, the brokers willing to process their payments all remain on side. And that's exactly where the Trump administration is seeking to strike even more. Indeed, later this month, November 21st, the Trump administration is set to roll out what insiders I've spoken to in Washington are calling the nuclear option, at least from an economic standpoint. These secondary sanctions on financial institutions dealing with Russia's largest oil firms. Rosneft and Lukoil, as we've covered, handle half of all of Russia's exports. And if you're like most people thinking, what on earth are secondary sanctions? Don't worry, they're simple but absolutely devastating, although they carry a little bit of potential counterproductivity as well. Now, the primary sanctions, as I'm sure you will know, target Russia itself, be them the individuals or the systems and the financial metrics Secondary sanctions target anyone who trades with Russia. It's basically a financial quarantine, and in today's dollar-dominated system, that's often worse than war. Already, India's Reliance Industries, Moscow's biggest buyer, has paused those purchases. Chinese giants, be them PetroChina, Sinopec and CNOOC, have followed suit. And why? Because unlike European measures, American sanctions do still bite. Certain data shows that vessels hit by US sanctions see usage plunge by 74% in only 5 months, compared to just 31% for the EU or UK targeted ships. And as others have put it, the difference with America is fear. When the US says you're next, people sit up and listen. So if that sounds ruthless to you, it's absolutely meant to. Trump's strategy isn't subtle diplomacy, it's intimidation economics. And if you've been following that pattern, as we cover a lot on the channel, Trump's foreign policy or the tariffs, as much as I like to cover geopolitics, it's important to cover the geoeconomics of these events, then that should be a familiar pattern. That being said, there are a few caveats with secondary sanctions. They are very risky, and similar to like the weaponization of the dollar by the Trump administration, countries do find workarounds for secondary sanctions, especially if they can wean themselves off the reliance of the US's economic hegemonic might. Now, that isn't something that's going to happen overnight, but the fact that China is trying to encourage more countries to take up the yuan or renminbi is an important development and something that Putin is hedging his bets on. With the case of that, it's more about how long does he have to rely on that alternative. Yes, he's doing more issuing of Chinese denominated yuan, but that's not enough to offset the terrible situation and ticking time bomb, slow motion car crash that is the Russian economy. Indeed, up until now, Putin's shadow fleet has kept Russia's oil flowing despite the cap. But the numbers do tell a story of strain. Out of roughly 900 tankers operating in the network, nearly 2/3 are now sanctioned. The UK has blacklisted 540, the EU 480, and Washington 183. But there's significant overlap. That's forced Moscow into desperate contortions, renaming the ships, faking ownership, reflagging under Liberia or Panama, spoofing signals near Oman or Cyprus. Anything basically to stay invisible. But invisibility is expensive. Each sanction slows logistics, it raises insurance costs, and it cuts margins. It's like fighting a war with a leaking fuel line. And now Ukraine's drones are physically targeting the pipes that feed this system. You can feel that squeeze tightening the more and more you read the headlines, if you read any Russian Telegram channel, at sea, in Moscow, and of course on the balance sheets. Then comes Ukraine's own actions. On 2nd of November, Ukraine drones hit Russia's Tupolev oil port on the Black Sea, one of its main export hubs. 3 tankers were docked for loading, all were forced to anchor offshore because of that. Russia can't even anchor its own ships in its own backyard. And the refinery, run by Rosneft, shut down completely. So you might ask, what difference does one refinery make? A lot. Toplat's handles are almost 250,000 barrels a day, most bound for China, Malaysia, and Turkey. So each strike compounds pressure on the shadow fleet, which already struggles to move cargo efficiently under sanction. And it shows how Ukraine's campaign isn't just symbolic, it's obviously always strategic in mind. Coupling these with the secondary sanctions on the same Rosneft company, it's a two-wedged sword, a double whammy. Kiev is targeting the economic arteries of Putin's war, not just his troops. And it sounds like a big shift because we're entering a new phase of this warfare, where the front lines run primarily through the oil terminals, the payment systems, and shipping registries. You can almost sense the panic, not on the battlefield, but in the offices of Russia's energy traders watching the supply routers burn, and in the Russian central bank. And so this phase is so dangerous because it's not export of oil, it's the entire Russian budget. Every barrel funds more ammunition, wages, propaganda. Cut that off and you don't just hit the revenue, you hit regime stability. That's what Moscow is now expected to mimic Iran's tactics, turning off ship transponders, building the shell companies even more, hiding payments behind offshore fronts. It's because Tehran has been spending decades perfecting this cat and mouse game. And, well, we can expect Russia to evade levels that echo that of Iran. And here's the paradox. Every time Russia evades, it isolates itself further from the global markets. And that matters because it's the very system that it's undermining. It's making it harder for China to be able to utilize it even remotely and put it in a difficult position regarding the secondary sanctions. It's a strange irony. Putin's economy depends on the same legal architecture he claims to reject. And you can hear the contradictions creaking, not just in a maritime sense. Now, what happens next is a little bit longer term. None of this is going to happen overnight. Russia will adapt and it will receive help. It will evolve just as Iran has done so. The two will likely support one another. Look at North Korea getting involved. But the direction is clear. Putin's war economy, as I keep saying, is unsustainable. Militarily by Ukraine, financially by the West, and politically by self-imposed isolation. And if secondary sanctions bite, Moscow's last stable income stream could collapse under its own weight. You might be wondering, could this backfire, driving up global prices again? There are some considerations of that, but the US thinks it can absorb that shock thanks to record domestic output and global oversupply. In other words, Trump is betting that pain for Russia won't mean panic for the markets. And you can see why he's confident. At least for now. And so what we're witnessing isn't a sanctions policy, it's economic warfare. Ukraine's drones, America's sanctions, Europe's embargoes, they all point to one struggle. That who controls the world's supply lines, and by extension, so its power. And while it looks like an oil story, it's really about the rules of conflict, the ever-evolving effort of different nation-states to compel or incentivize countries to come round. Because wars are no longer fought purely on the battlefield, they're fought through the trade routes, through data networks, and of course through drone warfare. And I'll be keeping a close eye on how these sanctions unfold over the coming days, weeks, putting it all together to understand how kinetic warfare plays into economic coercion and potential regime change. And I'll be heading to the Eastern Front very soon to cover a clearer view from this. So if you found that interesting and this breakdown useful, then do subscribe. It's very simple to do, it helps the channel much more than you think, and it's free. And if you'd like to go even further, and many of you have already done so, being supporters of the channel, links to do so, be it a member on the channel, on my Patreon, or just a one-time through Buy Me a Coffee, then that would be much appreciated. My name is Pyotr, I'm a mixture of English and Russian, and I try to bring that balance to you through what I cover on the channel. And remember that in geopolitics, the battle for resources often decides the battle for the influence, or in this case, Putin's stability. See you on the next one. Take care.